So this year I bought the Lumix S5 and I've really been using it for a lot of projects, going on vacations, even on a feature film, and I've used it on all my YouTube videos. And I think in many ways it might be the best cinema camera if you're starting out. And the first reason is the price. If you're buying this camera used, you can get it for around $700 to $800, and that's with a lens. And I think that's an amazing price. If you buy it retail, you'll probably get it for around $1,500. So I definitely recommend buying it used. For what you're getting, there's not many cameras that comes close, especially if you consider what you're getting when it comes to features, image quality, and it's just in general a great camera, not even considering price. But when you take the price into account, it really is an amazing deal. And I think when you're starting out and investing in your first cinema camera, obviously you shouldn't only look at price. But I think it's important that when you're investing in your first camera, it's not too big of an investment where it's too high of a risk. I think it's safer to buy something a little bit cheaper, like the Lumix S5, which still has amazing capabilities when it comes to image quality, features, and just in general, a really great camera. And also, which I'll get into later on, it's not only a cheap camera to buy, but it's also very much a cheap camera to operate and use compared to other lower end or budget cinema cameras. The Lumix S5 has a full frame sensor and it has around 14 stops of dynamic range, which is very usable. I mostly used it with the natural light outside in the forest. Even this is just all natural light. And I think it holds contrast really well. I've never really had any issues when it comes to highlights clipping or anything like that. I also really love the colors that come out of this camera. If there's one bad thing about the camera, I do think the skin tones end up looking a little bit too red or unnatural at times. So what I sometimes do, or often do, is I turn down the saturation just a little bit. And also, the vlog that you're getting from this camera is just really easy to color grade. I've used Arri Alexa, I've used B-Raw, and I think for me, the Panasonic vlog might be one of the easiest color profiles to color correct. It also has a dual ISO at 640 and 4000. If you're in low light situations, this is a great camera to use, especially if you don't have the budget for lights and stuff like that. I think that's a great thing to be able to crank up the ISO and get more light in. And also another bad thing is the rolling shutter. It's not incredible, so sometimes you get this jello effect. That's also compensated a little bit through the IBIS that the camera has, which is like top tier. I don't really need to use a lot of time color grading the footage. I mostly only use around 3 to 5 minutes on each clip color grading. I don't really need to fight the footage to make it look good. It often just looks good as is, and the only thing I adjust is the exposure and the color temperature. I think the image quality just looks really good. I think it's comparable to the Blackmagic cameras I've shot with the Arri Alexa Mini. And I think the images that I shot with this camera very much holds up to the images I shot with the Arri Alexa, Blackmagic Ursa 12K, Blackmagic Pocket 6K. So when it comes to image quality, there's not much I've really been missing. Another great thing is that it shoots in 422 4K 10-bit, which is quite compressed. But I think even though it's compressed and it's very low file sizes, I think it still looks amazing. And I never really had any issues with the codec at all. But I made other videos about the Lumix S5 and I talked extensively about the image quality. But I want to bring up 3 things that I think is the most important about this camera that makes this so good for beginner filmmakers, or if you're a beginner wanting to invest in a cinema camera. And the first thing is the IBIS. And what this means is that when you're holding handheld, if you don't have IBIS, you'll get this like micro jitters where like the camera is constantly shaking, especially with a camera like this, which is quite light. This makes it so that the footage that you're using is oftentimes not usable. But since this camera has IBIS, it'll compensate these micro jitters. And this means that you'll get a much more steady image. And I think with a lot of these IBISes that you have in other cameras, it has too much compensation where it will have this very floaty look, where you can tell it's been stabilized. But with this, I think it looks much more natural, and it looks more like natural handheld. And all the footage that I'm showing in this video has IBIS on it. So you can decide for yourself if you think it looks good enough or not. But I even shot a whole feature film, handheld. I just turned the IBIS on. And for some shots, if I was holding it really steady, it looked like it was on a tripod even. And compared to other cameras, this camera also has an anamorphic IBIS, which most other cameras don't have, which makes it so that you can have very minimalist camera setup with the anamorphic lens and not have to rig it out and still have the image be usable. And I think the IBIS is the main feature that, to me at least, makes the camera so incredible. And another great thing about this camera is that it has quite small file sizes. It shoots in 422 H.264 4K 10-bit, which is quite a compressed file format. It only shoots around 150 megabytes per second, which is very much on the low end, especially considering it's 4K. I think the image quality looks amazing, and we even shot a feature film with this codec. I've never had any issues with the image quality. I think it's usable for pretty much anything, especially if you're doing short films or even lower end feature films, and especially YouTube videos. The files that you're getting from this camera is more than enough internally. And the great thing about this is that since the file sizes are so small, you only need SD cards to record on it. If you compare it to like a Pocket 6K, you'll need a SSD or you need a CFast card to even record your footage, which are much more expensive compared to normal SD cards. So you can get an SD card for this camera for 30-40 bucks, if I'm not mistaken. And that means that you don't have to invest as much money on storage and on SD cards. So the camera is already cheap, but then you're also saving money on storage. And this means that as a beginner, when you're out going around with the camera and experimenting and shooting things, you don't have to worry about filling up your SD card or filling up your hard drive. And I bought this camera around 6 months ago, and I only bought one 2 terabyte SSD drive, and I still haven't filled it up. Another great thing about the Lumix S5 is the batteries. First off, the batteries are quite cheap. You can buy the batteries third party for less than $20. They're quite small, and also they last for quite a long time. I think this month I made around 5 to 6 videos, and I only had to use 3 batteries throughout that period. And I think if you're shooting a full day, let's say 8 to 10 hours, you only need 3 batteries, maybe 4. And also a great thing about this camera is that they boot up very fast. So when you're not shooting, you can easily just turn off the camera and save battery that way as well. Not only does it have a long battery life, but you can also easily just turn off the camera and not use battery power needlessly. So my point of bringing up these 3 features, the IBIS, the file sizes, and the battery life, is that when you buy the Lumix S5, it's pretty much ready to go right out of the box. You only need the camera, a lens, a SD card, and a battery. And 3 of these things you already get when you buy the camera. You know, it's ready to go. And that's how I've been shooting all my projects. The camera, a lens, SD cards, and a battery. I even shot a whole feature film this way. I haven't rigged out my camera at all. The only thing I've added is a Panasonic XLR adapter thing at the top to have my sound, then also a tripod. But all the footage that I'm showing you is just very minimal setup with just a camera and a lens. So this means that while the camera is already cheap, there's also not that many hidden costs. And I think that's a great thing knowing as a beginner that when you buy the camera, you can actually use it just as is. And that might seem obvious to some of you, but I think some of you might be surprised by how many hidden costs there are in other budget cinema cameras. And I use the Pocket 6K as an example. So the Pocket 6K and the Lumix S5 are similarly priced, but the thing about the Pocket 6K is that if you want to use it, it costs a lot more to actually use it. First off, it shoots in either B-RAW or ProRes, which are much heavier files compared to the H.264 you're getting from the Lumix S5. So to actually be able to record in a camera, you either need a SSD card, which costs often around $100 to $200 or you'll need to get a CFast card, which is even more expensive. And let's say you want to use the SSD. where do you put it, right? Because that's like a bigger drive that you actually need to bring with the camera. So then you need to have a rig to put the SSD card. And then you also need to have a wire going into the camera to actually record the footage. So that's an extra couple of $100. And also the batteries in the Pocket 6K are much worse. They last about 20 seconds. So to actually make the camera usable, you also need to rig it out and get a V-mount battery or something similar so that you can actually make it last more than 20 minutes. Or you need to find some other solution. And then, oftentimes, if you rig out the camera that way, the monitor that comes with the camera is then hidden. So you also need to get an external monitor to actually watch the footage while you're shooting. Okay, so then you need a monitor that also needs batteries. So you either need a cable going into the V-mount battery, or you need another battery again, just for the monitor. Then you also need a cable going from the monitor into the camera. So then you have at least 2 to 3 cables going into the camera. That's just outside the camera. You then need a rig. You need a monitor. You need external batteries that are much more expensive than the batteries you're getting in the Lumix S5. Probably at least $100, but often even more expensive than that. And also, another reason why you need to rig out the Pocket 6K is because it doesn't have IBIS. If you're just using the camera as is, first off, you'll only be able to use it for around 20 minutes because of the batteries. But then also, it'll have micro jitters if you're using it handheld. So the footage probably won't be usable anyways. So the thing about the Pocket 6K, in most cases, you probably have to rig out the camera and spend a significant extra amount of money to make it work compared to the Lumix S5. And also, as I mentioned, the files that you're getting from the Pocket 6K are much bigger. So then you also need to spend more money on hard drives because they fill up much more. And then it's also just a much bigger package. So it's much harder to bring out if you want to shoot things. So for me at least, it's a lot more demotivating shooting with a rig like that compared to the Lumix S5, where I can bring it anywhere pretty much. So like if you compare the Pocket 6K to the Lumix S5, I'm easily able to bring it out on vacation, just outside on hiking trips, and just take it out anywhere where I want to shoot. The thing with the Pocket 6K is that if you want to travel with it, you'd probably have to unrig it every time you put it in a bag or something like that. But with the Lumix S5, you only need to take off the lens, and then you can just put it in a bag like this. So for my camera setup, when I shot a feature film, I had everything I needed in this bag. It was just much more easier to just bring with you, and to me, it's just much more motivating. And to my next point, the thing about the Lumix S5 is that you have much more freedom to shoot. For me, the Lumix S5 and using it has been kind of like a eye-opening thing. Where before, when I used the Alexa Mini or the Ursa Mini Pro 12K or even the Pocket 6K, it was just such a hassle bringing it out and filming things. And it was often times where I just didn't feel like shooting because it was just so heavy taking out with you and just such a hassle. But with the Lumix S5, I'm shooting much more because it's much cheaper to shoot, it's much easier to shoot, and for me, it's just much more motivating. So maybe you get a little bit less information when you're shooting with the Lumix S5. But for me, it's a trade-off that's worth it because I'm shooting much more and I'm able to practice much more. And I also think it's just much more fun to use, which I think is much more important than having RAW or having a fully rigged out camera. And since you're shooting more, especially since you're a beginner, that's what you want to do. You just want to shoot and shoot and shoot. You'll also be able to grow much faster because you'll be able to shoot much more, get more footage, and learn more, which I think is important when getting your first cinema camera. So for me, as a beginner, it's important to have a camera that's not holding you back, but it's more so motivating you. And then, of course, the Lumix S5 is a simple camera that you don't have to rig it up to make it usable. Let's say you do want to rig it out, that's still a possibility. You can get an external monitor that can shoot 6K 12-bit B-RAW. You can get a cage to make it more heavier. You can get a V-mount battery so that the battery life will last longer. You can get a Panasonic XLR module so that you can get XLR inputs so you can record sound directly into the camera. Those things are also a possibility if you want to rig it out. But the thing is that you don't need to do those things at the get-go. It's not a thing that you need to do to make the camera usable. So then you can have like two versions of the Lumix S5. One version that's fully rigged out and one that is much smaller and easier to bring out with you to vacation and stuff like that. So you can have a rig that's more meant for work and stuff like that. And you can have a version that's more meant for, personal stuff like YouTube, vacation videos, and stuff like that. So as you're becoming more and more experienced, the camera can grow with you, and you can access these other features that you might not have had in the beginning. Some people might ask, is this camera technically a cinema camera? And the answer there is that technically it is a hybrid camera. It can take still photos and it can also shoot video. But the reason why I call it a cinema camera is that it has all the features that you need for a cinema camera. It shoots in log, it has 4K, it even has anamorphic D-squeeze internally, and it has everything you'd need for a cinema camera. If you want to get into video making and filmmaking, it offers everything other cinema cameras also offers. I'll speak a little bit about the weakness of the camera. I think the main thing turning people off from the Lumix S5 is that it has pretty poor autofocus, or at least I've heard. The thing is, I don't use autofocus. None of the lenses that I use has autofocus, so I wouldn't know. And obviously, if you feel like you need autofocus, then this camera might not be the camera for you. But that's also the reason why I call this a cinema camera. Most cinema cameras don't have autofocus. So for me, it's a feature that I pretty much just ignore. When looking at the camera, you should consider, do I really need autofocus? Because if you're a beginner looking for a cinema camera, I think it's a good discipline to learn how to focus manually instead of relying on autofocus. And all the footage that I've shot has been done manually focusing. So I've had no issues with that. So yeah, I think that's something to consider. But obviously, if you need autofocus, then maybe you should look at other cameras. I'll just say this again. For this camera, I do really recommend you to buy it used. I already mentioned this, but I'll just say it again. And the reasons are twofold. The first reason is that you'll get it much cheaper. I think if you buy it retail, you'll get it for maybe around $1,500. But if you get it used, you can get it for $600 to $800, which is like half the price. And then the great thing about having bought it used is that when you then sell the camera, let's say some years down the line, the value won't depreciate as much as compared to buying it retail. Maybe you even be able to sell it for a similar price as you bought it. But also, if you buy used, you should do research and also make sure that the people that you buy it from are the real deal, that there's nothing wrong with the camera. So please do your due diligence when buying used. And also another argument for buying used is that it's better for the environment. I think, buying so much new gear, it can't be good for the environment, right? So maybe do your part by buying used gear. Is what I would recommend you to. Is what I'd recommend. So just to recap, I think it's a great camera because it's ready out of the box. It's a cheap camera compared to what you're getting. It's also cheap to use compared to other cinema cameras where you need to rig it out. And it's also a camera that can grow with you. And it's also a camera that really, for me at least, motivates you to actually start shooting because it's so easy to use. And if you want more information about the camera or want to see more videos about it, I've made several videos with the camera. So just check out my YouTube channel and you can see more videos on it. And I'll see you later. So I just thought I'd add this little thing here because I now shot the video. I've shot for around 1 hour of like actual footage. I'll just show you how little battery I've used while doing this. So as you can see, I've only used 1 bar of battery and I've shot continuously for around an hour. So yeah, pretty incredible, if I do say so myself. And if I just check how hot is it, it's a little bit hot, but nothing crazy. I haven't gotten any heat issues or anything like that. So yeah.